When Chris asked me to give this talk, I got to admit, I was a little bit hesitant because when asked to talk about hacker culture, it seemed like something like, yes, like I really want to talk about this. But then I realized, I consider myself a hacker, but I know very little about our origins, and I know very little about the entire tent that constitutes all of what we do and who we are. And so I went on a little bit of a fact-finding mission just to kind of understand like our own roots a little bit. And some of that will be manifested here. This is not an exhaustive history. This isn't 500 slides or what could be like some boring history class. Instead, this is just like me briefly trying to understand where we came from and where we are, realizing that anything that I'm about to say and show you is just a fraction of what hacker culture really is. And what I'd really like to articulate through this is at the heart of it is that it's really just, instead of like what you wear, what you listen to, or what conferences you go to, it's really just about this kind of hacker ethic and a draw to things that challenge you and how you go about trying to solve those problems and live your life. So I'm going to say this is by no means supposed to be exhaustive. And please, like if Cannibal or any other hackers on, anyone here that's listening, wants to chime in with maybe a variation of what I say, or even a contradiction, if you feel like that doesn't represent a variety of hacker culture, the majority of hacker culture, or doesn't accurately represent what you would think it would be, let's have a discussion about that, because that's really, really important. All right, so I'm just gonna introduce myself. I'm Quaddy. I consider myself a hacker. Thinking back on my own journey, I think it was when I was in high school. Truly, I was into computers, but I was really into computer gaming in middle school. And then I started hanging out with people that were like, wait a minute, you just want to play computer games all the time? Don't you want to learn about the inner workings? And the Matrix had come out, and people had talked about computer hacking. And it was just this like really mysterious, exciting, powerful world in which you could use computers to do something interesting. At least that's what it was in popular media. I was drawn to those circles. And really what I realized is they were just other people like me that were really into computers and geeky and wanted to build things. But they possessed knowledge that I did not. And that was, how could you circumvent certain things, roadblocks in your way to achieving something you wanted to do with a technical system. Until I really ran in those circles, I would just say, well, I can't do this. I don't have the key. I didn't purchase the software, or I didn't know how to get around this particular block. And instead they were like, no, let me show you the way. Which is, you don't have to play by these rules if you understand how to go around them. And, you grow up as kind of, at least for me, and I think most people resonate with this, you're like a rambunctious, rebellious teenager. And that resonates very well with this like anti-authoritarian streak in a lot of hacker culture. So I just bit hook, line, and sinker into it, saying, I love being, thinking about these things, how to creatively problem solve, how to get into systems and technical systems that I wasn't supposed to be in. That was really exciting because it was also not drinking and playing football and going out and doing these things that my other peers were doing that I just had no interest in. And so I was able to use that as an outlet. This is me at one of the conferences we're going to talk about, which is really one of the big hacker events of the year, is this conference called DEF CON. You can see on the right here, just tons of hackers doing what they do best, sitting down with computers and trying to solve interesting technical puzzles. I think it's, wow, how offensive is it? You're here at a college level club discussion and I'm screenshotting Wikipedia. But what I wanted to do for those of you who didn't kind of understand the theme of what we're trying to get here is that hacker culture. And so I just wanted to briefly put up at least Wikipedia's definition of culture, which I thought was really social behavior, norms of human societies, knowledge, beliefs, art, laws, and customs. And so I'm going to be talking today about something different than what many of you might think a hacker is, which is a person wearing a black hoodie, doing some nefarious thing on a computer and cashing in and smiling at the end of a very dramatic scene. No, instead, there's like a whole thing. We wear similar clothes sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes we do. We enjoy the same fun electronic badges. Sometimes we lockpick. We do these things and share in some of these customs. We resonate with certain types of like hacker art and certain, I'm going to talk briefly about music, which is a big part of the hacker scene. And I do think that we follow certain laws. Now, there's a lot of wiggle room there, and the laws aren't traditionally thought of in a way of what might be necessarily the most ethical thing. We're going to get away from that stereotype that hackers are criminals. But I do believe that there are certain things in hacker culture that come out in some of the, I'm going to call them like the sacred texts of hacking, that show that we are more than just chaotic creatures, right? We don't just want to blow everything up and hack everything and hurt everybody. Instead, that there's really some laws to that, some kind of customs, if you will, that not a lot of us break. This was I was outside my front door, and I captured this. Hacker snuck into my garage, and I captured this for you today to show you exactly what you should be looking for with a hacker. No, I mean, clearly this is an amazing picture. I love everything about it. But it kind of gets a little bit to the cliches of hacking. Oh yeah, the power glove's legit for sure. Can't hack without a power glove. I bring this up to say, when you ask people like my mom, like, what's a hacker? She says, oh, like a bad person. When you ask someone else, they may say, oh, someone who knows a lot about computers and breaks the law and breaks into people's computers, whatever it might be. And for the longest time, there was this popular culture meme almost of like what a hacker is, and it looks something like this, baby. I want to say, like, I really have never seen a hacker like this except in parody form. And I'm sure everyone on this call probably self-identifies as a hacker, or at least most of us do. I don't know, maybe you look like that. Maybe you hack with a power glove on, maybe you don't. But at the heart of it is really like, where did we come from that this would be the stereotype of what a hacker is? Like, what was going on in human civilization to craft a stereotype that is represented by this amazingly cyberpunk image of a young male with a power glove, multiple different computers in front of him, clearly with a look of getting into trouble. And forgive me, my son he's quite angry at this time. Tied in with that stereotype we see visually of hackers and hacker culture is really this oversimplification of hacker motivations. That's a very quick thing. So you ask my mom, what's a hacker? She says a bad person who wants to get money. And then you ask someone who may know a little bit more about it, and they'll say, oh, let me tell you, there's these different camps of hackers, different groups of hackers, if you will. And they're categorized as this. And you have to tell me, are you a black hat hacker? Are you a bad hacker? And I'm like, what? So some people have tried to categorize hackers by their motivations or with what type of ethical or unethical behavior that they actually employ. So you'll hear things referred to as hats. I'll start off here on the left here with white hat hacking. That was mostly, I would say, identifies with like an ethical hacker, someone who deploys the same critical thinking skills and knowledge of technical systems and their vulnerabilities, but instead of for a nefarious purpose, does so to protect them, for example. And many people would consider ethical security researchers to be part of the white hat hacker group. So again, I don't think these constructs are meaningful. I don't think that they really accurately represent any hacker, which is a multi-dimensional person, more so than just a funny name of a hat. But I think in some ways it's useful to talk about how there's so many different types of hackers, and maybe how people have moved from one type of hacker to the other, or display some type of motivations and things that span several of these different types of tropes. So black hat hackers, the opposite of white hat hackers, they're there for personal gain, to do malicious harm, if you will. 3 gray hat hackers, which do something in between maybe. Red hat hackers, I mean, the most I like to think about is in these discussions of, excuse me, my son is slowly trying to break into this room. Red hat, blue hat, defense, offensive teams, hacktivists, which actually I think is one of the most interesting subcategorization that people have said about hackers, which is instead of hacking for money, like a cyber criminal, for example, they do so for a political purpose. There's some injustice they see in the world, or some political cause, or some other wrong or injustice, and they are able to hack technical systems, governments, etc., in a way to fight back against what they see as oppression. Now, a classic example of someone who might be categorized as a hacktivist might be someone like Edward Snowden. Some people may say sects of Anonymous might have categorized themselves as hacktivists. And there's a lot of one person's cyber terrorists or black hat hackers, another person's hacktivist. But beyond that type of simple categorization is think about it that you can hack systems, you can break laws for purposes other than your own personal gain. And I think that that's an interesting thing, especially in this era where we're seeing leaks of very sensitive information that may be damaging to certain political or geopolitical organizations. And a lot of that's coming from hacktivists or state actors. We could talk more about that. A common derogatory term of hackers is the concept of a script kiddie. You might heard of skiddos, skids, script kiddies. Think about, again, these are not, I don't agree with these necessarily, but think about traditionally what is considered an unskilled hacker, someone who borrows other person's exploits, tools, steals them, whatever, and then uses them without understanding their deep technical implications or can't build their own exploits, and then leverages other people's hacks, if you will, to access a system or deface a website, whatever it might be. So it's often considered a derogatory term, is this concept of script kiddie. Maybe a more useful characterization would be something like on the right here. Josh Corman talks about the 5 Ps of hacking, or the 5 Ps of security researchers. And I think this is somewhat useful because I think it does hit a little bit more at the hacker ethos. One is going to be this: hackers might hack to protect, right? They see a vulnerability that can impact people's data, or in certain cases like IoT, medical IoT, or industrial control systems, critical infrastructure, it would be. They want to protect people and want to protect people's data. So they're going to hack in order to do that. Some people, often called hacker rock stars or hacker royalty, some of those people are seen to hack for prestige. They get attention, they get interviews in the news, they do so for prestige. Some do it for protest or patriotism. We talked about hacktivism. Some do it for profit. You don't have to necessarily be a organized hacker criminal organization to hack for profit. There are a lot of people who are kind of lone wolf hackers or solo hackers that steal credit card information, for example, or attack systems to gain money. And then I think that this is probably one that really spans all of them. And it's this concept of a puzzle. I think hackers love to solve puzzles. Some people are really into chess. Some people are really into actual puzzles. I think hackers are into puzzles or difficult situations in which they can think creatively and apply creative problem solving to accomplish an outcome that is desirable and not intentionally designed by that person who made that system. That, I think, is a pretty strong shared ethos among hackers. All right. If you think Hacker Man or Neo from the Matrix is the classic modern day trope or stereotype of a hacker, you're going to be a little bit disappointed to find out that that's not where we were really born. We really were born in 1961 in MIT at the Model Train Technology Club when they bought their first PD-1. When MIT had their first PD-1, this is the birth of hackers, right? So there was this technology group on campus at MIT. They got their first PD-1, which is this giant computer here. And they basically formed this little culture around this device where they were able to do some amazing things with technology and really build and pioneer a lot of the kind of amazing early parts of computers. So what happened then? Clearly the birth is probably at MIT. It's spread over to Carnegie Mellon. It spread to Berkeley, and really was supercharged. And so let's back up a little bit. At MIT at this point, there was no internet. There's no ARPANET yet. I'm gonna let my dog out 1 second here. And they were almost like very siloed groups. Their passion for computers is what drove them. And they were doing less taking other people's work and trying to subvert it or find vulnerabilities and things like that. Wasn't like that. Instead, it was how can I build something from scratch? Building these systems, pushing them to their limits, and in that was also a lot of that creative problem solving. But instead of the traditional, I'm going to pick apart some other system, they were really building them. We have these isolated little groups. They're spreading. They're mostly in academic institutions and large places where they could buy these types of computers because personal computing wasn't a thing yet, right? So if you were interested in this, you had to be in an academic institution or government organization, or in that time, like very rarely would it be like a company. But you can imagine an academic institution is kind of like a prime place for this type of hackerdom to start brewing. You have a bunch of undergrads working on computers for the first time in humanity, kind of building things, exploring things, and then also having a kind of like a little bit of anti-authoritarianism still in them and fighting back a little bit. And as a consequence, what they were able to do then is once the ARPANET started, the precursor to the internet kind of blew up, what did they do? They connected mostly government and academic institutions to the ARPANET, where then they were able for the first time to really allow that hacker culture to bleed out of these localized areas and span the entire country, and really kind of supercharged what the early days of hacking was. How proud to say UCSD, one of the first on the ARPANET. If you don't know this already, we still have remnants of the ARPANET. You guys probably know all this stuff, but we have a remnant of the ARPANET that connects us and UCI, for example. It connects a bunch of places, but kind of exciting to be pioneers of the early internet. That's not what it is now. You know, there was actually, sorry, it deleted 3 of my slides. Along with this is early, along with this ARPANET is the explosion of different types of operating systems and free software. So you have the Free Software Foundation, you have Unix, you have Linux, you have Solaris, you have these other types of early advances in computing operating system, mostly as this fertile kind of common work to be done with these hackers. And so they band together, they advance these things, make beautiful advancements in kernels and other types of operating systems, or in operating systems generally, to then at the point that they are no longer just isolated to academic systems and government organizations. Then when personal computing became generally affordable and the technology was more ubiquitous, hacking then bled from individual pockets at academic institutions. Now it's the ARPANET, and that's a select few of them. Now we're really starting to see hackers bleed out into living rooms, and that younger and younger people were able to be involved. And we started seeing some really cool stuff. You know, we have our own texts. One of the things, everything got mixed up, but we have our own texts as hackers. Two of my favorite texts, hacker texts, if you will. We talk about culture. We have to have some sacred texts. These are almost like zines, little magazines, where hackers could get together and anonymously share information about systems, cool things they found, backdoors, Easter eggs in software, talking about attacks even, or how to circumvent certain things. And they put them in to publications like FRAC or 2600. And that's generally transitioned from now, well, from previously, which was, you know, a physical book or a magazine or a zine, now to websites all over the internet. So as the World Wide Web evolved as well, and that ability to host that type of information changed, now we have a lot of hacker culture inscribed all over the World Wide Web. But I bring this up to say, you know, we have our own texts. And early on, in one of my favorite, in 1986, and maybe this is one of the very few things you can take away as influencing your perceptions of hacker culture. If you have a chance, I'd really encourage you to read the entirety of the Hacker Manifesto. This is a document written by a hacker that went by the handle of The Mentor. And if you guys aren't familiar with what handles are, and many of you might, I mean, I'm assuming you all do, but think about, we don't use our real names most of the time in hacker circles. We use our handles. And that really spawns out of the early internet, where you were using anonymous pseudonyms that stuck. And so mine's Quaddy. Over here, we got Cannibal over here. Chris, I know yours is Necrosis. I don't know if you want me to tell anyone that. You know, the statute of limitations passed, sir. But this hacker's handle was The Mentor. And in 1986, he wrote, it's been later on confirmed, we know who The Mentor is, I can say he wrote this in 1986. I have a snippet of it. I have my favorite snippet from the Hacker Manifesto up here on the screen, but it is longer. I'd encourage you to read the whole thing. And the backdrop for this was that hackers were now able to access the World Wide Web through modem technologies, telephone lines. And as people were exploring telephone lines and their intricacies and how that technology worked, that birthed a subsection, if you will, of the hackers, or really maybe the precursor to the more modern hackers that we know about today, which are phone phreakers. Some of the most famous early Silicon Valley entrepreneurs were all phreakers. And you can look up Steve Wozniak and Jobs building something called a blue box and trying to sell that and make that their first company before they made the Apple One. You can really see at the heart of modern day computer hacking is built out of this phreaking movement. Well, phreakers were getting arrested. They were exploring these systems, and AT&T was getting mad, and they were disrupting things when really they were trying to explore. And these are kids. And increasingly, hackers were getting caught. This is the background to this piece right here. They're getting caught. The feds are swooping in. In my opinion, they're using hugely draconian laws to, like, you hacked a phone number, you're gonna go to prison for 10 years, and these are kids. And what happened in the scene at that time was really people were scared. Certain hackers were turning on each other. They were getting caught. And as a consequence, the hacker called the mentors got really frustrated and wanted to express to those that didn't understand what hackers were, what they actually stood for. And I think it's poignant. I'm not going to read all of this text on the right, but I think the first part's really poignant. This is 1986, and he says, "This is our world now, the world of the electron and the switch, the beauty of the baud." Next paragraph, "Yes, I am a criminal. My crime is that of curiosity. My crime is that of judging people by what they say and think, not by what they look like. My crime is that of outsmarting you, something that you will never forgive me for." And so this to me is at the heart of what hackers, at least a majority of them in my mind, the good hackers who will really stand for: fighting intolerance, injustice, understanding technological systems. And clearly there was foresight in here, is that this is the future. This is our world now. I'm a hacker. This is my manifesto. You may stop this individual, but you cannot stop us all. After all, we are all alike. A further document in one of our sacred texts has been referred to as the hacker ethic. Now, some people may say this has changed quite a bit from when it was written, but I honestly think it's a lot of this sticks. First, that they have access to computers, and anything which might teach you something about the way the world works should be unlimited and total. All information should be free, that you should mistrust authority and promote decentralization, that hackers should be judged by their hacking, not bogus criteria such as degrees, age, race, sex, or position. You can create art and beauty on a computer, and computers can change your life for the better. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, most of that's beautiful, I thought. And so now that we've kind of set this, the Hacker Manifesto, talking really about misunderstanding what hackers are and what they stand for, the hacker ethic, which clearly I think a lot of people could resonate with at least a majority of these points here, sets the stage for kind of modern day hacking. Modern day hackers. Well, guess what? We don't look like hacker people with power gloves, and not all of us at least. We look like regular people. Maybe a majority of us wear too many black shirts and wear cargo shorts. Maybe. I mean, I think we have a higher general percentage of that than the population. I'm not saying that this picture confirms that or anything, but hackers aren't the stereotypes that they ever were, let alone now. This is a conference. We're going to talk about this, really. This is DEF CON, where until COVID, upwards of 30,000 hackers would descend on Las Vegas to hang out, to learn from each other, to teach one another about exploits, about systems, about thinking creatively. we don't always hang out in person. In fact, that's the minority of the time. For the largest time, people, the origins of hackers, they used to just only hang out online. It was very rare that they would meet in person. But I think a lot of that's changed. And there's still quite a bit of the hacker underground where you'll interact with people your entire life and you'll never meet them in person. You'll know them only by their hacker name, their handle, or whatever it might be. But I think increasingly people are recognizing that hackers aren't always criminals, and that identifying as a hacker isn't always a bad thing. In fact, now most of the time when I say, hey, I'm a hacker, to someone who doesn't know what a hacker is, they want to know more. They want to ask more questions. And they don't immediately run away from me or say, you stole things out of my bank account. Instead, I think what is changing is that people recognize that hackers, cybersecurity is now not just for a subsection of the population. Instead, now everyone does everything online now. And they recognize that there's importance in security. And I think they also now realize that they can't just ignore this and they can't just make a bogus law to try to fix this. And slowly, as the older generations are replaced, that understanding of cybersecurity and part of that hacker space, if you will, as being a part of everyone's life is also raising. And also, I think popular culture and popular media has made hacking into something that continues to be quite exciting. And exemplified by movies like The Matrix, for example, or other things where you can actually have underdogs now carry a narrative of a story as hackers, and people that know nothing about hacking will root for them. That to me is a pretty big advancement. There, of course, was something like that back in the day, things like war games, a movie like War Games or Sneakers, for example. But now I think more than ever, hacker isn't a dirty word anymore. Part of culture is we have our own art, right? We have music. One of my favorite DJs, and this is a guy who was really into punk rock and roll growing up, right? Never was into electronic music. It would be funny, I go to DEF CON every year and I realize like, I actually like electronic music. I just happen to always see it live at DEF CON. But really, I would say that a lot of hacker culture revolves around electronic music. And we have hacker DJs. We have other people that don't actually play electronic music that are hackers that play rock and roll or whatever it would be. At these in-person hacker events is a strong artistic component to it. There is beautiful art made by hackers displayed that's unique, I think, to many other different art genres. Electronic music is playing everywhere. It's the night festivities. Once the talks are done in the day, everyone's going out to party and listen to electronic music and be together and appreciate art. And it's funny, like if you've ever listened to electronic music a lot, some people would say it sounds a lot alike. But what we have with a lot of the hacker electronic music is almost like nerdcore hip hop has really evolved out of this too. And it's really funny to hear a rapper talk about a buffer overflow, to rap about a buffer overflow or rap about Nmap, and port scanning and things like that. It's pretty awesome. I don't know many places in the world where you could get that type of art, but you get it at hacker conventions. You get it as part of Hackerdom, where we're so passionate about our computers, about security, about hacker culture in general, that we're going to rap about it. I think that's pretty impressive and speaks really to that we do have a unique culture. There is something there. There really is, hackers you don't even have to be technical, right? You don't even have to know about computers, I think, to identify with what we talked about in the hacker ethic or the Hacker Manifesto, really. Yes, I think a vast majority of us, live our lives on computers and that's our domain, but the concepts so easily apply to other parts of your life that you can recognize that hacker mindset can extend to things like lockpicking. If you go to a lot of hacker conferences now, there'll be a bunch of people just picking locks. Why? Are they breaking into homes? Are they breaking into banks? No, the answer is no. I'll tell you, it's funny. I once told my wife, you got to come to DEF CON with me so you can learn how to crack a safe. And she said, why would I ever want to crack a safe? And I said, because there's an intellectual exercise in it. Do you want to understand the underpinnings of this lock? No, I guess no pun intended. The underpinning of the lock that's protecting our front door. And she said, I trust it. Well, here, pick this lock. She does it easily in 2 minutes or 3 minutes. She had natural talent for it. She goes, wow, it's that easy to do. I said, yeah, well, let's talk about it. And then we taught each other essentially how a lock functions. And there are so many analogies in lockpicking to that of computer security, for example, vulnerabilities in the design of a mechanism that you can exploit. In computers, it's with bits and bytes and code, but with lockpicking, it's with steel and a tension wrench, right? That exploits a vulnerability in the design. It was not intended to be picked by a piece of metal. It's supposed to be opened with a key and you didn't have it. It's bypassed. It's an almost perfect analogy for a lot of the vulnerabilities we see in computer systems. And then so it's natural that hackers would extend to studying things like lockpicking and getting really good at it. This is the social engineering village. And so a lot of hacker conferences, they'll have little groups of people or organizations that run different types of like sub-events. And I just wanted to talk briefly about social engineering. You know, the early days of hacking after we talked about MIT, we talked about ARPANET. You know, there was a nice stretch of hacker history where we had some of what people perceive to be the greats or some of the most famous hackers, people like Kevin Mitnick, for example, or other types of early hackers. Now, I'm not saying Kevin Mitnick was a great hacker or not a great hacker. I'm going to stay out of that debate. But you can't ignore that there are some like famous hackers back in the day that did some very illegal things, like a lot of illegal things, and you got caught. But they were all over the newspaper. And one of their common tactics that these kind of famous kind of mal hackers or bad hackers, if you will, employed was something called social engineering. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here. For you guys probably all know this, but think about where human psychology meets some type of objective-oriented engagement, and you don't care about whether or not you use deception or not, or you must use deception to do. What does this mean? How do we intelligently lie or have a hoax or some type of ruse to manipulate people into doing something? That something with a lot of the early hackers was giving up things like passwords or usernames or getting them to log into systems and click actions and do things that they never otherwise would do because you happen to be a very persuasive person. So social engineering was a huge part of early hacking and being able to say, well, I could go and break into this system using some zero-day exploit, or I can call this researcher and ask them to do it for me unwittingly by convincing them that I'm the dean of the college, for example, or whatever it might be. I bring this up to say that you can do that to manipulate someone to do something bad, but you can also do it to win a competition at DEF CON. What am I talking about? Well, like I mentioned, early hackers use social engineering, but none of us want to like break laws and be mean to people, or we're not trying to steal credentials from someone. Instead, we can still employ the same weaknesses in the human psyche, in their psychology, and in social dynamics, primarily in business, to achieve some end, and in this point to score points. So this is a competition at DEF CON where, and other places where a business will agree to be a part of this competition. Contestants will apply to be a part of this contest. They'll get some information ahead of time of this business, which again has agreed to do this. And they go into this soundproof box in front of this crowd of people, and they pick up the phone and they call this business. And they have a checklist of things that they're supposed to get people to do over the phone to manipulate them. And each point that they get points for different things that they do. One point might be, for example, get the person on the phone to open up an Internet Explorer browser and go to some website. And I think many of you on this call would recognize you shouldn't open up a web browser and go to some random URL from someone who calls you on the phone. If you do that, it's bad. Clearly, you could download malware, steal your credentials, phish you, whatever it's going to be. Not really phishing, but steal your credentials, harvest your information, whatever it's going to be. I bring this up to say, this is a way in which we can leverage those types of traditionally bad attacks to then show businesses their weakness. For example, like you failed miserably. We had these people call into your company and they were able to get anything they wanted out of your receptionist or out of your interns or whatever it might be. You should shore up your defenses this way. And that's, I think, a big part of being able to deploy what are traditionally thought as really bad actions and turning them into really good output, where the status of the system becomes much stronger, so that a person that does not have scruples or really wishes to harm someone will not be able to do so because someone before showed them their weaknesses. But there's all sorts of other interests under DEF CON. You'd be under hackers. And I keep bringing up DEF CON just because it tends to be my jam, but there are things like coffee cooling contests where people use engineering engineering skills to cool down coffee. Or I'm sorry, beer. I'm sorry, not coffee, cool down beer, but also brew coffee. That's another contest. There are contests on robotics. There's password cracking competitions. And I'll tell you briefly one of my favorite stories that has to do with hackers. And that was, there was a contest at DEF CON about, someone's mentioned the tinfoil hat competition. You know, you can make a tinfoil hat and model it, and whoever has the best tinfoil hat wins. You can imagine how funny, but also probably spot on that is for DEF CON. There was a competition at DEF CON back in the day that was called the Wardriving competition. For those of you who know what Wardriving is, it's you drive around, war driving, you can war walk, you can war crawl if you want, whatever it is, but you use antennas and computers to collect wireless information about access points around you, right? Or any type of wireless broadcasted traffic. You collect information about it. And so that's called war driving. You go around. It doesn't necessarily mean you break into those systems, but at least you're intercepting that traffic, recording it, mapping it, et cetera, whatever it might be. There was a contest at DEF CON for many years called the Wardriving contest, which was whoever could get the most unique access points. You know, you have 72 hours. Whoever can get the most wireless access, unique access points wins. And you can imagine back in the day that made a lot of sense because wireless technology was pretty new and it was exciting when you found a new wireless network, for example. Not so much now, but it was back then. And Wardriving still, I see Chris sending me dagger eyes. Wardriving is still a thing, don't get me wrong. It's just a little less impressive. What did the hackers do at DEF CON one year? One team said there's not enough access points in Las Vegas. I'm going to drive to Los Angeles and quickly ride around there and collect access points. Sounds smart, right? Many more access points in Los Angeles. That would make sense. One team decided to build a very large antenna so that the range in which they could collect Wi-Fi was extended. You can imagine that's like thinking outside the box, thinking creatively. One team, though, I think really took it to the next level, which was amazing. And this is the hacker ethos here. You ready for this? They called up the news, the local news, and they said, did you hear that there's a hacker convention in town? If you let us on your helicopter, we will show you where they are. And so the news said, hackers, absolutely. Get on our helicopter, show us where they are. And they flew around Las Vegas, war driving, collecting samples of wireless traffic as they fooled the news into flying them around. You know, clearly they were employing social engineering tactics. Why do I bring all this up? You know, there's a lot of things that you can do with a hacker mindset. And in hacker culture, there's room for so much of that. We share information. That's one of the things I love about it. You know, in medicine, for example, it's so closed down, right? If you want to learn about medicines, you have to basically join a guild, and information's like locked up, right? There's so many different groups like that where they don't actively share that type of information as readily. I think hackers intrinsically love to share, and we do so often in person and outside about what we found. Sharing the passions of these types of things. It's part of our culture. I had 3 slides. They got messed up, but at this point, we're 46 minutes into this. I thought we'd take a Q&A, and we have great hackers here answer questions about hacker culture.
Yeah, everyone should be able to unmute too if you want. So feel free to ask any questions.